Good morning, Inbound. It's good to be here. 43 today. What's even more exciting is today is also my daughter's birthday, and she turns 2. So I care so much about the work that I'm here. I left my family at home. And I'm just so excited to be here. There's actually one more occasion today. It's also Charity Water's 12th birthday. So we just stacked it all up. I started the organization on my birthday, started having kids on my birthday. So I really can't think of a better way to start the day off to share my story with you. So I'm going to start at the beginning. This is me. I was born in Philadelphia to a middle-class family. We have Philly in the house, all right? Mom, Dad, he was a business guy. She was a writer at the local paper. And when I was 4 years old, we moved into this house to get closer to my father's job. He wanted to reduce his commute so he could spend more time together as a family. Now, what we did not know was that this house had a carbon monoxide gas leak. This was before they had invented the detector that you now buy at Home Depot. So we move into this house and we all start getting a little sick. And on New Year's Day, 1980, my mom walks across the bedroom and she collapses unconscious on the floor. We take her to the hospital, we do a long series of blood tests, and the doctors find massive amounts of carboxyhemoglobin, carbon monoxide, in her bloodstream. So she doesn't die, thankfully, but her immune system dies and it's irreparably destroyed. So from this point on, anything chemical makes her sick. And she gets migraines and hypertension and rashes and vomiting. And I watched my mom, because of this heater, this was actually the thing that almost killed our whole family. I watch her go from this vibrant mother, a vibrant wife, to an invalid, allergic to the world, wearing these charcoal masks and connected to oxygen. So Mom was so sick that perfume would make her sick. The ink from books would make her sick. I remember as a child, my dad and I would bake her books in the oven to try to get the smell of the print out. And then I would take these slightly charred books up to her room. Her room was a bathroom that was covered in aluminum foil. And she slept on an army cot that had been washed in baking soda 20 times. That was in between the tub and the toilet. And then Mom would wear this mask and she would take the book that we'd given her and she'd put it inside a cellophane bag with cotton gloves on, and then she could read. So it was a weird childhood. She miscarried what would have been my sister. Family planning stopped with the illness. And I grew up an only child, taking care of her, helping with the cooking and helping with the cleaning. And I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up so that I could help Mom get well. My parents were Christians, non-denominational Christians. They actually decided not to sue the gas company because they didn't want to become bitter. And instead of fighting for millions and millions of dollars, they took a $1,200 check and said, "We know you're sorry." I grew up playing piano in the church on Sundays, and I played by all the rules. I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, I didn't cuss. I was like that good Christian kid taking care of Mom, and all was well until 18. And then New York City happened. So, I woke up one day and said, okay, I played by the rules, now it's my turn. Now it's my turn to go and explore. And I join a band, I grow my hair down to my shoulders, which was a terrible idea. I'm not even gonna show you photos of that. And the band immediately breaks up as I moved to New York because we hated each other and everybody was doing drugs. And this is the beginning of a long series of cliches that will play out in my life. And then I learned that, my band broke up, but I'm in New York City, and I learned that there's a job in New York City. And if you're interested in rebelling, you could rebel in style as a nightclub promoter. And all you had to do was get the most beautiful people inside the right nightclubs. And if you did that, you could charge them astronomical amounts for liquor. People would pay $20 for a vodka Red Bull. And they would pay $500 for a bottle of champagne that cost you, $30. So over the next 10 years, I'm climbing up New York City's social, ladder. I'm working at 40 different clubs over the decade. This is a picture of me in some VIP room 10 years later. And what's sad about this picture is that I'm pretentiously holding out a Rolex watch to a club photographer I've never met, because I want to make sure that he takes a picture of my expensive watch. This is what I thought was important at the time. This is my business partner, Brantley. We were so successful at this point that we were getting paid $4,000 a month by Bacardi just to drink in public. And then Budweiser paid us another $4,000 a month just to drink Budweiser in public. We're like, this is the life. We just don't drink for free. We get paid to be seen drinking in public. Got a little darker. This was around 10 o'clock. This might be around 3 or 4 in the morning. After the cocaine and the ecstasy and the MDMA. And somewhere around noon the next day, even darker. So I'd picked up every vice that you might imagine would come with a decade in nightlife. I had smoked 2 packs of Marlboro Reds for 10 years, so I had a coughing problem. I had a serious drinking problem, a cocaine problem, a gambling problem. I had a pornography problem, strip club problem. I mean, pretty much everything short of heroin I was doing at this point. And I was just rotting inside. There was this rage that just overcame me. I had an epiphany when I was 28, and on New Year's Eve, we went to South America, and it was this opulent vacation. We'd rented a compound with horses, and there were servants waiting on us, and magnums of Dom Perignon. I remember going to a fireworks store and spending $1,000 on fireworks that we just blew up in our yard. My girlfriend at the time was on the cover of fashion magazines. I drove the BMW. I had the watch. I had the Labrador Retriever. I had the grand piano in my New York City apartment. All of these markings, all these things I thought would make me happy. And I realized, instead of being happy, I was the most deeply unhappy person that I knew. I was emotionally bankrupt. I was spiritually bankrupt. And if I continued down this path, the legacy that I was leaving, was not only a meaningless one, you could argue a destructive one. And my tombstone was going to read, "Here lies Scott Harrison. He's gotten millions wasted in his life." Who wants that on their tombstone? So I start to reevaluate my life, and I start to rediscover a very lost Christian faith and wonder what that might look like as an adult, not one that was kind of force-fed to me by my parents. Explore a lost morality, and I come back to New York City, and I realize I want to make a change. Takes me about 6 months, and some crazy things happen in nightlife, but I ask myself, what would the exact opposite of my life look like? What would the 180-degree turn be? 6 months later, I sell everything I own. I remember liquidating 2,000 DVDs on eBay in a single lot, just trying to purge, all my DVD collection, my porn collection, just everything. Like, get rid of it all. You can just have whatever is in this chest. Wanting to start over. And I thought the opposite of my life might look like a year of service to the poor. How could I use my gifts to serve others? Maybe on a humanitarian mission. So I leave New York City. I begin applying to the famous humanitarian organizations I've just vaguely heard of over the years. Oxfam and World Vision and Save the Children and UNICEF and Scott Harrison, the great nightclub promoter, is now ready for service. You can guess how this went. I'm denied by every organization. No one will take me even for free. Finally, one organization writes me back and says, "We're in a little bit of a bind. So if you are willing to go live in post-war Liberia," country I never even heard of at the time, "and if you're willing to pay us $500 every month, you can come and volunteer with us." I'm like, this is actually perfect. Like, what is more opposite than paying to volunteer and actually going to the poorest country in the world? So I joined as a photojournalist. I dusted off a degree that I'd gotten in NYU in communications and said, look, I'm going to come and take pictures and tell stories of the important humanitarian work I'm sure you're doing. And maybe you can use those stories to raise awareness and raise money. So I go into Liberia. The war has just ended. Many of you have heard of Charles Taylor and his brutal 14-year civil war led by child soldiers. So we go in with 14,000 UN peacekeeping troops. This was the largest force ever deployed in the world at that time. And we find the country to be broken. Now, this was going to be my new home. It was a 522-foot hospital ship. Amazing group called Mercy Ships that for a quarter of a century had sailed this ship up and down the African coast with a very simple idea. Let's bring the best doctors and surgeons to people who can't afford access to medical care. So they had 42 beds on this ship. They had 3 operating theaters and a volunteer crew of about 350. So I learned that this ship is led by a guy named Dr. Gary Parker, and I get to meet him and learn his story. He was a surgeon in California that signed up for 3 months. Said, I could go and I could help people for 3 months. And when I walked up the gangway of the ship, that was 20 years ago. He just never left. Walked away from his career and spent 2 decades, got married and actually raised his kids on the ship. So I had this moment before I joined the mission, before I walked up the gangway and sailed to Africa, where I just went all in. I realized that I would have to quit the vices. I will admit, I went out with a bang. I mean, the night before, I smoked like 3 packs of cigarettes and, armed up with the Nicorette patch and the gum, and I drank like 8 beers, so I turned up with a hangover on day 1. But that was it. I just knew that I could never smoke again. I could never touch coke or any of that stuff again. I could never gamble again. I could never be involved in any sort of pornographic images in my life. I needed to just walk so far in the other direction in the hope that some new story might unfold, to walk into a new path. So I quit everything. I jump on the ship. We sail into Liberia, and I start taking pictures of a broken country, bullet holes everywhere. You just couldn't take a picture without capturing bullet holes on lampposts and buildings. This was just a typical apartment building in downtown Monrovia where hundreds of people were living. No glass, no windows. This was a house that was once beautiful but had just been decimated by the war. So before the ship had pulled into port, a small advance team had posted these flyers around the country. And they said, hey, if you have one of these conditions, if you have a giant facial tumor, if you have flesh-eating disease, if you were burned by the rebels, often the rebels would pour oil on the children and on the people to try and fuse their body parts together for fun. If you were born with a cleft lip or a cleft palate, turn up on this day and our doctors will try to help you. A third day on the mission, I grab my Nikon cameras. It's 5 a.m. I put on hospital scrubs. I jump in a convoy of Land Rovers with the medical staff, and we start heading towards the football stadium. The government has given us a soccer stadium to triage the patients that might come. I know we have 1,500 available surgery slots to fill. And as we turn the corner that morning, we see over 5,000 people standing outside the stadium, hoping to see a doctor. This hits me really hard. I remember just beginning to weep, realizing we're going to send 3,000 people home who came with hope. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough surgery slots. I later learned many of these people walked for more than a month. They walked from neighboring countries with their children. The first child that we let in, first child I photographed, was this little boy named Alfred. He was 14 years old, and he was suffocating to death on his face with a benign tumor. This is his mom, and his mom says through a translator, my son was completely fine 4 years ago. This is Alfred at 10. And then this thing starts growing on his face, and there's no doctor to take him to. There's no surgeon that can help. So they take him to witch doctors, and they cut him, and they apply pastes, and they do chants, but a tumor grows larger and larger and larger until when I met him at 14, on the brink of death. And I learned we were there to help children like Alfred. I scrubbed up a couple days later, and I documented his amazing surgery. It was about 8 hours. As these volunteer surgeons who could be in the Maldives, they could be in the Caribbean on vacation, and instead were paying their own way to use their gifts in the service of little kids named Alfred. I got to take him home with his new face a couple weeks later, and I got to watch him heal. And it was a place of miracles. I thought I had the best job. I would wake up in the morning. Thanks, guys. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd go down to the ward and I would start photographing and learning the stories of the patients that were scheduled for surgery that day. And this woman's name was Marthaline. Told me that this tumor had grown for 8 years. And you can kind of see here, she's holding a towel at the bottom of the frame, a little colored towel. She said that if she showed her face in public, people would throw rocks at her. They would stone her because they thought she was spiritually cursed. She had done something to bring this on herself. What she needed was a 40-minute surgery to remove a benign mass and get her face and get her life back. It was an extraordinary first year. I took 50,000 photos that first year. And what was enjoyable for me was I was blasting these photos and stories to the 15,000 people on my club list. Right? The people I'd been getting drunk for 10 years. So some of them were like, unsubscribe. Like, whoa, like that Prada party you threw was really cool, but like tumor leprosy party, no thank you. You know, back then email open rates were like 100%. Imagine a tumor hitting you at 8 in the morning, you know? Well, actually it is. Most people, though, were moved. Most people said, I didn't know that this existed, this kind of suffering. I didn't know there were doctors who were doing something about it. How do I give money? How do I give my time? How do I go on the ship? I'll do anything on the ship. People said, I'll clean toilets on the ship. How do I get involved? So I learned there the power of really being able to redeem the thing that I did for 10 years and just tell a different story, promote something completely different that actually mattered. I come back to New York City and I put on an exhibition of the photos. I raise about $100,000 and I go back for another tour to Liberia. And in the second year there, I see dirty water for the first time. Now, I had never seen a human being drink dirty water before. Probably many of you in this room, probably most of you in this room, have never actually watched this. You've never seen people drink from a swamp. I met this little girl named Hawa, and I just couldn't believe that this was the only water she'd known all 13 years of her life. This is the water she used for drinking, for bathing, for cleaning her clothes. And I learned that 50% of the country was drinking bad water. Half the country was drinking from swamps and ponds and rivers. So I didn't think I had to be that smart to start putting these things together. Thousands of people sick, turning up to stadiums that we can't help. Half the people in the country don't have the most basic need for health met. So I'm showing the doctors and surgeons in the operating theater these photos I'm taking, what people are drinking, and they are all encouraging me to go work on this issue. They're saying, you know, you could raise money for the next hospital ship, or you could go and tackle the water crisis and make sure people wouldn't need the hospital ship. So I come back to New York City, and my friends are still drinking bottles of water in nightclubs that cost $10. Crazy thing about it is we would sell water to people who wouldn't even open the bottles because they were drinking champagne or vodka instead. They just order a couple $100 of water for the table to sit there. And there was something about the contrast that was just so energizing. How could we live in a world where people could spend $500 on a bottle of champagne or $10 on a bottle of water that they didn't even care to open? And yet, at the time, 1 billion people lacked clean water. So I came back to New York City and I tried to do something about it. That was going to be the mission. The mission was going to be to work for the rest of my life to end the water crisis, to bring clean water to every single person on the planet, to make sure that everyone alive had their most basic need met, regardless of where they were born or the conditions they were born into. So this is the current crisis. It's 663 million people. 1 out of every 10 human beings alive today is drinking bad water. Now, I put up a number like this, and most of us just kind of numb out. It's a paralyzing number. It's impossible to imagine 663 million anything, people, objects, let alone people without clean water. So really, over the last decade, we've tried to tell stories. We've tried to show the stories of the people trapped in the water crisis. Kids like John Bosco, he's one of the first people that we met. And he lives in Rwanda, and this is the water that he drinks every day. Now, you guys look at this water, like me, I wouldn't let my dog drink this. I wouldn't let an animal drink this water, let alone a child, let alone a teenager. But it's all he had. This little girl in Honduras just drinking from a river. It looks more like chocolate milk. Started to learn about all the diseases directly associated with contaminated water. You've all heard of cholera. It can kill you within a day. E. coli. I had never heard of schistosoma before, which I learned was a fancy word for parasites. Affects over 100 million people. If worms crawling around their body because of the water that they've had to drink. I learned that 52% of disease throughout the developing world is because of bad water and a lack of sanitation, a lack of toilets. I met this little girl in Kenya, and I was with a few people. I remember watching in horror as she would drink from the Molo River, this brown, viscous river, and then she would vomit on her shirt. We watched this in repeat in horror and said, we have to do something about this. Promised to try and find a sustainable solution for her village, but I took her water back to New York City and I put it under a microscope. And this is what the lab sent me. I remember they said, we're not experts in all the different kinds of waterborne diseases, but you sent us water that's alive. No one should be drinking water that looks like this. As we traveled around, the women would hold out their hands and they would show us the leeches that they were picking out of the water. And they'd say the big leeches are never a problem for us, but sometimes these little leeches, they'll get through the filtration that we're using and they'll grow up inside our bodies, or worse, they'll grow up inside our children's bodies. Leeches like to climb up to the back of the throat and stick there. So if you're a parent, you have two options. If you live in one of these villages, you use a stick and you try to actually kill the leech, or else it'll crawl up again. Or you give your kid a little bit of diesel fuel to drink, just to scald the leech. Hopefully not enough to injure your child. This is how most of the filtration is done. It's often too expensive to buy firewood to boil water. Often there's just no awareness. I learned that half of the world's schools didn't have clean water. I am sure there are many people in this room deeply passionate about education. But imagine sending your child to a school with no clean water and no toilet. We later learned this was one of the top reasons teenage girls were dropping out around the world. They get their period, they stay home a week a month, they fall behind in their studies, they drop out of school. There's already enormous social pressure against so many of the girls to be educated because they're so useful at home. And what we see is girls who should be in school walking 5 hours in the middle of the day in the hot sun with 40 pounds of dirty water on their backs. I've now been to 69 countries. I've been to Ethiopia 30 separate times, and I have learned this is exclusively a women's issue. Doesn't matter if I'm in Africa or India or Southeast Asia or Central and South America, it is the role of the women and the girls to get the water. And we see women in the most undignified situations, like these women. They're ankle deep in cow feces with their children, trying to get to the eye of a spring where the water is a little cleaner. This woman in eastern Kenya was digging in the sand, trying to hope that she would find water. I asked her, I said, well, I don't see many other women here. Where are they going for their water? She said, oh, there's a big river, but there are crocodile attacks at that river. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Go over to the river. This was that river. Only a 5-minute walk from where she was. And the women there start telling me the names of people that came here for water and were never seen again, that were taken away by crocodiles. It's hard for us to imagine. It's hard for us to even fathom. The story that's impacted me the most is actually a story I told on this stage exactly 5 years ago. But I'd only heard it then. And there was something about the inbound talk that actually caused me to go and pursue it. I'd heard this story that there was a girl in Ethiopia, a woman actually, who was walking 8 hours a day with a clay pot on her back. And as the story went, one day at the end of her journey, she slips and falls, breaks her clay pot, watches all of her water spill out into the dust. And she took a rope and she hung herself from a tree instead of going for more water. That was the story. And I remember I had just come back from Ethiopia. I was up here, I told the story, and I didn't actually know that it was true. And I began to wonder, was it really true? So I went to this village to find out for myself. I flew to Addis. I flew up to Mekelle. I drove 5 hours until where the road ended. And then to get to this village, because it was so remote, I had to hike 9 hours. So I rented this donkey, put my solar backpack on it, and we took a trek 9 hours over the mountain to reach the village of Maida, where apparently this woman had lived. I pitched my tent next to the chief's house, and over the next week, I began to learn about Letakiros Hailu. I didn't know it until I went to this village, but she wasn't an old woman. She was 13 at the time of her death. I met her mom. This is her mom. Her mom told me she vividly recalled the moment where she watched over the plain the elders bringing her daughter's body on a stretcher covered in a white shroud. She said she began to wail and throw herself around her stone house. She cut and injured her back, and she's never been able to walk the same. But she said, my daughter's death actually changed nothing in this village. She said, you can go and walk where she walked for water. So she sends me over to her best friend's house, and she shows me the clay pots that they used to use and the rope that they would use to attach it to their shoulders. The clay pot has now been replaced by the yellow jerry can, but they're still walking the same distance. So she takes me to the edge of the plateau, and she said, we got to go all the way down to the bottom of the ravine for the water, and then we got to carry it back up. So we walk down. This takes us hours. If that's not bad enough, when we get to the bottom, there's a long line of other jerry cans of women that had gotten there first. Because the yield was so low, it would take 30 minutes just to fill one of these cans. Just to put this in our perspective, one of these cans, 5 gallons, it's 2 toilet flushes for us. 2 flushes of the toilet, which is what someone is struggling all day to get. This was the source, just this little seepage coming out of a rock. There was another source, but it was even farther. It was a greater distance away. Start learning about what Letakiros was like, and I went to the church where her funeral was given, and the priest said she was this loved girl by the village. He said over 2,000 people came out for her funeral. He shows me her burial spot, just this little pile of rocks. He said she wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to bring health care to the village. I asked her friend, I said, why do you think she did it? Her friend said, I think she would have been overcome with shame because she'd let her family down. She had not only spilled the water that they needed that evening, she had broken the clay pot, a valuable asset. The last day there, I asked the elders to take me to the tree. And this is where they took me. A little path. They said they scattered the clay pot far away where the pieces would never be seen again. This is where they found a 13-year-old girl's body hanging after she spilled her water. I came back angry. The injustice of it. Like, not on my watch. How is this possible that we live in a world of such extreme affluence, of technology, and a 13-year-old girl out of desperation is tying a noose around her neck and taking her life because she spilled her water? The great news about working on this issue, the great news is that it's a completely solvable problem. There is not a single human being alive that needs to drink dirty water. There's not a single person on the planet right now who we're scratching our heads to say, we have no idea how we'd be able to help them. This is not like some of the diseases that we are actively looking for cures in labs and test tubes and hoping to find a vaccine or a drug. We know how to bring everyone alive clean water. We haven't created the will to do it or the resources to do it, but we know how to do it. And there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There is no silver bullet. A lot of different things work in a lot of different contexts. Sometimes you can dig wells, sometimes you can drill wells, sometimes you can harvest the rain or get mountain springs and build gravity-fed systems. Sometimes you can build filters and take existing surface water and make it clean. It is often as simple as drilling a well for $12,000. So many of these communities are living on top of clean water, of the water that could save their life. What they don't have access to is $1 million drilling rig and compressors and trucks. If you're living on $1 or $2 a day, you don't have $1 million. They don't have access to the skilled hydrologists who actually know how to find the water and build the well. But when you can bring these resources in, it's one of the most amazing things to be a part of. To watch water shoot up from the ground, to be surrounded by 2,000 people. This was actually on my birthday. I was in Ethiopia, standing on this rig, taking this picture at a school where there were over 2,000 students who had never had clean water before. And in 48 hours, they found a massive lake, an aquifer under the school. It's amazing to see the kids rush the drilling rig, and they're clapping and they're dancing and they're splashing, and the parents are always trying to peel the kids off because it looks dangerous. But imagine seeing clean water for the first time in your life. I'll play just a short clip. This is a village in Malawi that got clean water for the first time, and their village was actually cut off by a huge ravine. And everyone in the village sent one person to go build a road to bring the drilling rig in. It took them 3 months. And this is the moment where they saw that hard work pay off. Can we just go back one? I'll let you guys play it. So I can tell you that never gets old. Never gets old. That's what we get to do. We have said for 10 years, we believe now more than ever, water changes everything. It is one of the most transformative things on planet Earth. If you really want to impact people's lives, if you want to lift them out of extreme poverty, water is the best way to do it. It means health, right? If kids aren't drinking from swamps and peeling leeches off their throats, they have better health. When students at school have clean water, when the schools have toilets, you get better students, you get better grades, less truancy. And the remarkable thing is it gives time back to women, not only better health, but time back to women. And we hear extraordinary stories of what women do with that extra time. Selling rice at the market, selling peanuts. I was recently with women in Zambia and Zimbabwe that were selling rugs for $6 that they were making because they had the time to actually go to the market and to make the rugs. Many women tell us we're better moms. We get to spend more time with our family, less time on the road walking for water. One of my favorite things about the issue is that it's truly one of the few things everybody can agree on. I never come off a stage and have people tell me to stop it. Scott, let them die of bad water. This is harmful aid. Children should be drinking from swamps and dying of diarrhea. Like, it just doesn't happen. And the beautiful thing is you could get people to agree on this that won't agree on anything else. People that are fighting about politics, that are fighting about religion, fighting about geography. Everybody can come together and stand for clean water for humans. So it's been an amazing unifying issue to work on. People of all faiths, people of no faith. People can come together and agree. The other nice thing about water is it's binary. You know you've made a difference if you can take a child from dirty water to clean water. You can test the water. It's clean or it's not. It's flowing or it's not. One of my favorite stories is of a woman named Helen Apio in Uganda. And she got clean water, and our team was just trying to assess the effectiveness of the project, make sure it was built well, and just see how it was being used. So it was at the end of a long day, and they tried to sneak into Helen's village without her knowing, because their speeches, and it takes a while sometimes to settle into a village. They obviously want to greet you, and they'd been a part of 4 celebrations that day. So as you're going to see here, Helen's in the green. She gets wind of the group from Charity Water coming and makes sure that they are not going to go unannounced. So she shuts down the road. So that goes on for a while. And then we sit with Helen, and we learn her story, and she begins to tell us the story of 2 jerry cans. She said, every day I would walk a long distance, and I would bring 2 jerry cans back. And she said, I never had enough water, and I would make these decisions every day. Do I hook up my husband with water? Do I let my kids drink the water? Do I cook? Do I garden? Do I clean? Do I wash my kids' school uniforms, my husband's clothes? She said, I always put my family first. She said, that's what Ugandan women do. She said, I never use the water for myself. So she said, now that there's a water point in my village, now there's clean water flowing in my village and I don't have to walk anymore, she said this to us. She said, now I am beautiful. And we're a little dense, okay? We're like, okay, Helen, of course, you're a beautiful Ugandan woman. What do you mean? She says, no, now you don't understand. For the first time, I have enough water to wash my face and my body and my clothes. And she said, now I am looking so smart. I feel beautiful. And she had her best dress on that day. And we thought, man, we never even thought of that before. We talk about health and education and the data behind water. The simple fact that water could help a woman feel beautiful, could restore dignity. That was an amazing thing. That's what we wanted to be in the business of doing. Okay, I'm going to talk about the organization. So I started exactly 12 years ago today. I'd come back from Liberia. This was the couch, so it was a real startup story. My old club partner takes me in. I have no money at the time because I've given all my money to Mercy Ships and the people I met along the way. And nightclub promoters are terrible at saving money. So he takes me in, he says I could sleep on his closet floor. He had a walk-in closet next to this room. And he said, you can use my couch as your office. And I'm running around telling everybody that I want to bring clean water to the world. And I realize there's a big problem because people don't trust charities. So I had the advantage of coming from outside the philanthropic establishment. I knew everyday people who went to clubs and who worked in fashion and in marketing. And I realized there was a deep cynicism out there. My friends would say, oh, charities are black holes. I don't know where my money would go. I don't think much of it would reach the people in need at the end, so that's why I don't give. I learned there was data behind this. There was a poll in USA Today found 42% of Americans actually said they don't trust charities. This surprises people, right? America has this unbelievable reputation for being generous and philanthropic. 70% of people polled by NYU said they believe charities either wasted money or badly wasted money. 30% of people thought charities did the right thing with money. So I thought, this is a huge opportunity, right? I'm not interested in going and getting other people's donors. I'm interested in creating something to win back the trust of this group of people, of this demographic. So I began to talk to them and just ask what their objections were, and we created a business model that would speak to those objections. There were a couple important pillars. The real vision, what a lot of people don't know, the mission is to bring clean water to everybody on earth, but the vision is to reinvent and reimagine charity. Charity means love. It's caritas in the Latin. It means to help your neighbor in need and get nothing in return. I thought we needed more of that in the world. And if we could speak to these objections and create more charity, create more love, then that would be even the bigger thing that we were doing. So I had a couple ideas of how to speak to these people. The first was, what if we promised 100% of every donation we ever took in would directly fund water projects? People say, well, that's the stupidest business idea I've ever heard. How will you pay for your staff? Like your salary one day, like an office. I'm like, I don't know, but I bet this gets people to give. So I opened up 2 bank accounts with a few $100s in each and made this promise. 100% of the public's money forever will only go to water projects. We will be so crazy about the integrity of the 100%, we will even pay back credit card fees. So if someone gave $100 and we got 97, we would make up the $3 difference and send the intended 100 to the field. In bank account number 2, the overhead bank account, we would figure it out. I don't know. We would find a small group of generous donors who could actually get excited about paying for the staff and the overhead. Maybe foundations or companies one day. That was big idea number 1. The second was, okay, well, money was not going to be fungible, so we could prove where the money went. And we at first just started putting up the photos and GPS coordinates of every water project we were funding. We said we will never do a project unless anyone from the public with the cost of a $50 GPS device can pull down the data and go visit them all. People just weren't doing this at the time. Third thing was I wanted to build a beautiful, epic brand. Charities were not great at marketing and branding years ago. Their websites were anemic. Think like animated blinking GIFs and 100-page PDF white papers. There was a study once of a famous organization that found that 70% of the PDFs on their website had received 0 downloads. Right? Direct mail, like I'm gonna buy your physical mailing addresses and then send you paper and ask you to put a check in a self-addressed stamped envelope. Like this wasn't the future. Nick Kristof had written in the New York Times, he said, people are now peddling toothpaste with more sophistication than all the world's life-saving causes. That this is broken. Why shouldn't a charity have an epic, imaginative, inspiring brand? Why shouldn't charities hire the best designers and convince them to leave the best design firms and use their skills for good? Why shouldn't we care about the way we create and the quality and the excellence of that work? Things should be beautiful. There was a shame and a guilt that pervaded the sector, and I think that's sometimes best personified by this phrase that we hear so much. We're giving back. I'm sure some of you have used it, right? We hear about every company now giving back. I loathe this language. This makes it sound like we have pillaged and plundered to such an extent that it's finally time to throw some scraps to the poor. Out of shame, out of debt, out of obligation. You know, imagine I walk up to you in the front row and I snatch your phone. You'd say, give it back. It's not a positive thing. Maybe we should just drop back, just talk about giving. Frame it in the positive. Create a culture of generosity and giving in your company and your family, giving your time, your talent, your money to serve others. So we wanted Charity Water to feel differently. We wanted it to be based on hope and opportunity and feel like an invitation. Not like those old TV commercials with the sad, eyes of kids with flies landing on their face in slow motion as they locked eyes with the camera and the 800 numbers striped. The great brands in the world never use shame and guilt to manipulate people into buying or to giving. So why should charities? Most important thing was we would not send anyone that looked like me over to Africa or India or to Asia to drill wells. I believed our role would be to get people to care about this, to raise as much money as possible, but for the work to be sustainable and culturally appropriate, it had to be led by the locals in these countries. Believe that from day one. So our job was to find them and build their capacity, buy them more drilling rigs, buy them more trucks, help them hire more hydrologists. They would be the ones getting all the credit. They would be the local heroes leading their communities and their countries forward. Success would be a country where Charity Water invested $100 million and we turned up and no one ever heard of us, but certainly knew the local partners who had gone and actually made it possible. So it was a giveaway 100%, prove to the public where the money goes, build a beautiful brand and work through local partners. And the only thing I knew how to do on day one, here we go again, was to throw a birthday party for myself in a nightclub. Through my 31st birthday, gave everybody open bar for an hour to lure them in, and I made everybody pay $20 on the way in. We raised $15,000 that night. And we took the money immediately to a refugee camp in northern Uganda. And we sent the photos and the GPS back to the 15,000 people that came, and we said, you did this. Like, you came to a party, you threw $20 in a box, and here is the result. People are drinking clean water because of you. People were blown away. They'd never expected to hear from a charity again, especially over $20. And we said, this is the magic. Let's just keep doing this on repeat. Let's keep creating this feedback loop, restoring people's faith in giving, trying to create a redemptive cycle of generosity. We said we don't always have to be so serious with our brand. Sometimes we can have some fun and get people to think differently about water. You know, what if you gave your kid Kool-Aid with no water? Actually, my kids would probably like that. Pure sugar. You know, we're trying to use images just to bring the issue alive a little bit. Imagine giving your child death in a baby bottle, like so many moms around the world. We got donated ad campaigns on buses and taxis. Oh, this was a fun one. We shot rich people in New York City in the same situations as the people we were serving around the world. Imagine if that was your mother, or your kids going to a private school that had to haul 40 pounds of dirty water on their backs, or your banker friends who had to go to Central Park Pond in New York City at their lunch break in their fancy suits. We would never allow this for others. Why was it okay for other people's mothers and other people's kids? We built a digital-only organization. We were the first charity to get 1 million Twitter followers, first charity to use Instagram, and we just believed that social media was the future of how movements would spread, how people would learn about causes and engage in how they would see their impact. And we've always been looking for ways to celebrate our community around the world and the extraordinary things they have been doing for clean water. Almost 2 years into it, we ran out of money. You can guess which account. We've been scrapping to get people to fund overhead, and we were faced with this moment where we had $881,000 headed to the field to build water projects, and we were about to miss payroll. We were out of money in the overhead account. I had tapped everyone I knew. The business model wasn't working. And the advice I was getting from friends was, hey, go borrow against the $880,000. That's 9 months of working capital. Write a frigging IOU. And I was just so shocked by that idea. If we borrowed 1 penny, we would compromise our integrity. There'd be a crack in the foundation. We might as well all just resign in shame. What was the point? So we were going to send the money out, wind Charity Water down in the next few weeks, and just say it didn't work, this business model. I had been praying like crazy at the time. Very little faith, but I'd been praying for a miracle. Believe it or not, one day a guy walks off the street, sits with me for 2 hours, internet entrepreneur. I pour out my heart. I say, here's what we're doing. The 100% model is working. People are giving for the first time in their lives, but I have no money to pay our 9 staff. I don't know how I'm going to make this work. He says, let me think about your problem. 2 days later, it's midnight. I'm stressed out. I'm on the laptop. And I get an email from him. He says, hey, the wire should have gone through for $1 million. Let me know if there are any issues. I remember logging into the overhead account, and there it was, 1,000,000. We went from insolvency, from the kindness of a stranger who believed in us, to more than a year to figure things out. We used that extra time. Oh, one of the fun things we did with, the gentleman's name was Michael. was we took a little bit of money in secret and we built a well for him and his wife and 3 of his kids. And then I invited him out to see all 5 of them. And this was the celebration he got in Ethiopia at his 9-year-old daughter's well. That's them in the crowd. And he got to see the impact of the organization that he was helping to build. We used that extra time to create a giving program that we called The Well. And today, Charity Water's 100% model is made possible by 130 families who all pay for our overhead on 3-year terms. And it's amazing people from technology. It's the founders of Twitter and Spotify and Facebook. It's people, senior executives at Apple. It's amazing venture capitalists. It's people in sports and entertainment. Anyone from Ed Norton to Depeche Mode have been well members, to football quarterbacks. It's an assortment of friends who say, we want to help you pay those costs that nobody else wants to, so that the public can have this pure way to give and trust. They all give between $60,000 a year to $1 million a year, and it's an amazing community of people now around the world. 130 people making Charity Water's 100% model possible. Talk about birthdays a little. We stumbled onto this idea, and we said, well, what if instead of celebrating our birthdays by getting stuff, what if we turned them into these redemptive giving moments? And we had this extraordinary little boy in Austin, Texas, who turned 7 years old, and he started knocking on doors asking for his 7th birthday. And he said, we just donate $7. He knocked on so many doors, he raised over $22,000. And we said, this is a big idea. No one needs more crap, right? And we all have birthdays every year. What if our birthdays could help people have more birthdays? So this idea starts to spread. Tony Hawk donates his birthday. Jack Dorsey donates 3 birthdays. Daniel Ek from Spotify donates his birthday. Angela Aaron sends out an email, raises over $101,000 as people honor her birthday through the gift of clean water. Spreads to Hollywood. Will and Jada Smith donate their birthdays. Raise a couple $100,000, then they say, we want to come with you to Ethiopia to actually see the impact of our birthdays. So they came to the field. So all that was cool, but the heart of the movement was 6-year-olds in New York City like Lori, and 16-year-olds in the middle of the country, and one of my favorite, 89-year-old Nona Ween. I love her mission statement. She says, I'm turning 89, and I'd like to make that possible for more people. She realized she's lived double the life expectancy of people in so many of these countries. It's impossible to talk about birthdays without honoring a very special little girl in Seattle who heard me speak, and at the end, after I called for birthdays, she gave up her 9th birthday. I'm going to play you a short video to honor her life.
It's 6 in the morning and we're about to go see some of Rachel's wells.
I am Richard. I am Rachel's grandfather. I really wish Rachel could be here today, because first of all, Rachel would think that this is probably the neatest thing she'd ever seen in her entire life.
our community, our church, where we are from, we greatly love Rachel and continue to love her family. And I'm overwhelmed with how greatly you have honored her memory. So please receive my most deepest and heartfelt thanks. You've done us a great honor today, so thank you. Yeah.
Rachel developed such a big heart from such a young age that she understood and felt the pain of others on the other side of the world. To give up her birthday present so that other children can improve their lives is the most beautiful gift a person can give.
What was so amazing about Rachel's legacy was not only did the heart of this 9-year-old girl inspire 30,000 strangers around the world to give, including people from Africa, by the way. People in Africa were giving $9 in her honor. They then followed her lead, donated their birthdays, raised another $2 million. So she has now given over 100,000 people clean water. Her goal was 10. What it really helped us learn, it was a reminder, Charity Water was not our story. Charity Water was never our story. It was the story of our community. It was the story of Nona and Max and of Rachel. It was the story of our local partners who were the heroes out there making it happen, of our volunteers, of our donors. And we needed to keep telling their stories and inviting more people in, inviting more people to add their voice, to add their birthday, to add their donation, to add their ideas. Started focusing on transparency and impact and, showing people what happened when they gave $12,000. Well, this is all the stuff that we go out and buy, and this goes into the ground. Or if it was in Cambodia and we were doing bio sand filters, this is what $10,000 would buy. All of these materials to provide people with clean water. We started mounting GPS units on our drilling rigs, so people could see where they were at any given time. And we gave our drilling rigs Twitter accounts, so they tweeted their locations. As we scaled up to about 10,000 projects around 26 countries, we said, we know where all the projects are. Now we want to know that they're working. And we approached Google and we won a $5 million innovation grant to go out and build a remote sensor, a sensor that we could retrofit and then begin to install on new projects where we would know how much water was flowing. We open sourced the project. We made a sensor for $100. The minute we installed 3,000 in the pilot, we got the largest data set of rural water supply in the history of the world. No one bothered to do this before. It's kind of the Internet of Things for wells. Imagine knowing the productivity of a project over time. So now we can go back to Rachel's family and say, hey, here's so many of Rachel's wells, right? Some of them have sensors on them. Not only can they see exactly how much they cost, not only can they see the satellite images and the pictures of them from the sky, but now we can tell them how much water is flowing 5 years later and continue to measure the impact of this little girl. We can zoom in on a single day and say, women started getting up at 4 a.m. getting clean water. And that single day, 1,579 liters were pumped. Imagine if we were to go and buy this. It'd be $3,000 worth of water every single day, the way we value it. In 11 years since starting the organization, I guess 12 today, I'm not used to saying that. We've been able to raise over $300 million thanks to the generosity of over 1 million people around the world. 1 million people that have rejected the apathy that's so easy to embrace when you talk about a global issue this big. It's easy just to be paralyzed. 1 million people said we can do something. And that's allowed us now to bring clean drinking water into over 29,000 villages for 8.4 million people. So 8.4 million people have clean water because of our community, because of people who have done something about this. We now employ over 650 locals around the world that are out there drilling and building the rainwater systems and out there constructing these projects across 26 different countries. As I think back, on the journey, I'm glad this guy's gone. You would never invite this guy to speak. And really, I believe, what I would hope my story might say for some of you, like, no one is beyond redemption. Maybe some of you guys have kids on the wrong path. I mean, it is never too late to change and walk in the other direction and start anew. God's blessed me with a beautiful wife, a beautiful family, an amazing mission in life. Like, I get to see people get clean water. I get to travel around and see villages transformed. I get to promote generosity and compassion and empathy and love and giving. It's like the greatest job in the world. My mom fought for 40 years. Got to meet my son and my daughter, and just recently passed away a few months ago. Taught me so much about determination. Taught me so much about fighting for others, fighting for what you believe in. Dr. Gary, still on that ship. 30-some years now. I think he's in year 32. He is still using his gifts in service of the poorest people in the world who can't afford access to medical care. And I recently got to see the well for my birthday party. It is not a pretty well after 11 years, but it's still working. It's in that refugee camp. The refugee camp went from 30,000 people down to about 500 as the war ended. But I got to see clean water flowing. We reckon that well has been pumped about 50 million times over the last 11 years. And then finally, John Bosco, I showed him at the very beginning. This is what happened because people decided to help. He and his family went from drinking unthinkable water like this, bathing in water like this, and then drilling rigs started heading towards his village. And he watched local Rwandans jump out, right? Heroes to this little boy. And they start drilling the well, and a couple days later, they find clean water, and they start building the well. And less than a week later, John Bosco is drinking clean water for the first time in his life. He was one of our first, and it was cool to go back 8 years later and find that John Bosco, our boy, no longer a boy, all grown up, he was a man. And in that time, he'd gotten married and he'd had his own daughter, Jean-Marie. And it struck us like, she'll never have to drink that bad water. The cycle of poverty, of water poverty, was broken because someone reached their arms across an ocean and cared for him, cared for his family, cared for his village. And we've been able to do that 29,000 times now, thanks to the community. I know many of you in this room have been supporters and been on that journey. This is his daughter, Jean-Marie. As we look forward, 8.4 million down, it's a big number. You know, it would fill up Patriot Stadium, Gillette Stadium, 133 times. So it's a lot of stadiums. It's 12 times the population of Boston. But even though we're helping 3,561 people every day now, even though the time that I was on this stage, 148 people got clean water for the first time in their life, we've done so little. 8.4 million, 663 million. It's 1/78th of the work that needs to be done. So that fires us up. That keeps us going. We believe we can do this. We believe we can see a day on earth when everyone has clean water to drink. So I'll ask you guys the question. Maybe you are sitting there saying, what could I do? How could I join? How could I help? There have been a lot of different answers over the year. Today I'm just going to give you two. The first actually has to do with a book and $60. It's probably the simplest way you might be able to help two people get clean water ever. I spent the last 18 months putting down the stories of all the remarkable people that we have met at Charity Water, the people we've been able to serve, stories that I just didn't have time to talk about today, stories about guns and lawsuits, and stories that might make you absolutely cry and hopefully jump up with joy and hope. This has been a labor of love. I poured everything I've had into this. I called it Thirst. It comes out in a few weeks, and this was initially supposed to be my kids' college fund. I was going to keep the book advance and keep the proceeds, and then at the end just realized, hey, I got to take my own advice. This isn't my story. This isn't our story. This doesn't belong to me. This belongs to the people who need clean water. So the entire advance and all the proceeds are going to Charity Water. A donor read an advance copy and was so inspired that he said, tell you what, I'll put up $300,000 and I'll pay $60 on your anniversary, on your birthday, for anyone that pre-orders the book in any format. I'll give two people clean water in their name. I want this book to be out there. I want it to move people. I want the story to spread. He said, until the money's gone, I'll give $30 for everyone else. But on your birthday, you can tell people that if they just order it and they send in a receipt, even if it's on an ebook or audiobook, I'll give $60 in their name, as I want them to have this experience. So that's a pretty simple way that you could help. I think you'll love it. There's so many stories in there that I really wish I could do like 5 hours with you guys. The second is the spring, and let me just say a little bit about this. As we turned 10, we wanted to build a community of people who wouldn't just show up once, who wouldn't drop $100 online or do one birthday, but people who would stand by us for the next decade as we really see an end to the water crisis. We realize people subscribe to things all the time now. The average person has 11 subscribers, or 11 subscriptions. Spotify and Apple Music and Dropbox and maybe HBO, Netflix. We get benefit from all these things. And we said, what if we could create a program where 100% of the benefit went to people who needed clean water, where 100% didn't go to us, but it went to others. So we called it The Spring. We thought that meant hope in a time of new beginnings, and it also means clean water. And we anchored it around $30. That's what it costs us to get one person clean water, to move someone from a dirty water source to a clean water source. And we said there are a lot of people who could do $1 a day, who could do $30 every month to help people get clean water. We promised to send stories of impact around the world, where these donations were going, who the community was helping, and it just started spreading. The spring has now spread to 100 countries around the world. We have college kids giving $10. We have kids giving their parents their allowances. We have people giving their pensions in their 90s. We have companies giving $100 and $500 a month, all across the spectrum. But the important thing is building this community of people who say, we want everyone on earth to have clean water. So I hope you might consider joining Charity Water. The only way we have been able to do this is through everyday people who have just said, man, I could actually sit by and do nothing, or I could actually do something. I could make a difference. I could use my time, my talent, my money in the service of others. So we worked with the Inbound event team, and we created a website. It's a very simple website, just charitywater.org/inbound, where you could do one of those things. You could hopefully do both of those things, and we could actually track the global impact of the people in this room, in this session, forever. It would be amazing to come back 5 years from now and say, the people in this room, they were moved. They listened to the stories, and they decided to do something about it. They decided to join the spring and month in and month out, partner with us to bring clean water to people in need. I hope you guys might partner. I'm going to leave you with my very favorite quote. It's something someone sent me as I passed a bodega. It was a photo outside, and it said, it's from an old rabbinic text. It said, "Do not be afraid of work that has no end." Do not be afraid of work that has no end. I really believe if your work is in ending the needless suffering of others, if you wake up and you say, how can I use my gifts, my money in the service of others, it will never end. It will never end. That's okay. That's something to be embraced. When we solve the water crisis, we're not going to drop the mic and go try and become millionaires. We'll take our community, we'll turn our attention on another pressing need. We will not stop fighting for justice. We will not stop fighting until everyone on earth has clean water to drink. Thank you guys for listening.